festival, and this is going to start a series of 4 straight afternoons here. I looked at the schedule this year, and I thought of sort of 3 categories of artists that were being presented. There were the mainstays, the people I think of in the prime of their careers who are really, you know, carrying the banner on their instruments or in their style, what have you, and Regina Carter, who opened, would be one of the people, Jeff Keezer, Donald Harrison, Jerry Bergonzi. Then we had the masters, and we had a weekend of NEA Jazz Masters, 3 of them. Pretty impressive, I think unprecedented in this festival, that many. And then Eddie Palmieri is coming next week. And then we have the emerging artists, several of whom are going to be presented on this stage during this week. And the first of which is Linda O, who I'd like to bring out for our conversation. Linda. And Linda has one of the more interesting backgrounds, just reading her website. Mm-hmm. You grew up in Australia, but you were not born in Australia. So maybe you can take us through the early years.
Okay. Yeah, I was born in Kuala Lumpur, well, just outside of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And when I was 3, my family moved to Perth, Western Australia. Yeah, so I don't remember a lot of Malaysia, but okay. Yeah, that's what I was born.
And I also noticed that you studied several instruments before, mm-hmm. I don't know if settling is the word, but arriving at the bass. Mm. And I assume you weren't, or maybe you were improvising from the get-go, but could you talk a little about your progress playing music and coming to improvisation and to composition mm-hmm. also?
Well, I guess I started at a young age. Me and my sisters, we all took piano lessons when we were 4. My mother always wanted to play piano, and she took a few lessons when she was pregnant with me, but before then she just never had the chance to. She didn't have the opportunities that we had. So that was one thing that she wanted for us, was to have that. So we all started on classical piano, and we kind of went through those motions of, we started off in Yamaha Music, which is a program which is heavily oriented on oral skills and developing the fixed do mentality. I don't know if many of you are musicians here, but that's what we focused on. And we went through a piano school where we did all sorts of things like group classes, as well as we did a bit of composition, actually. That was part of the program that we had. In amongst exams and competitions, which were actually quite stressful and competitive.
Now, how old were you when you were going?
I guess we started our exams and competitions quite early, like around 6 or 7.
Okay.
You know, but they were a good challenge. You know, something to always work towards and experience that competition lifestyle for a second. But I guess when I was in primary school, which is the equivalent to elementary school, we took up some other instruments, and I had taken up the clarinet and the bassoon. The bassoon I took very seriously in high school. That was something I was very much into, until one of my uncles had given me an electric bass, because we used to talk about rock music. He was into rock music, and so was I. And so he gave me an electric bass one day for Christmas, and I started fiddling around on that and getting together with high school bandmates and playing electric bass, and then in the school jazz band. And that's kind of how I transitioned into jazz. I had been doing a bit of improvisation before that, just with my sisters and just making up stuff along the way, but it was never really structured, you know. Mm-hmm. And the high school band program was kind of my way into that world, because through the high school band program in Perth, Western Australia, it was through that I managed to meet a lot of college musicians, as well as more established Perth musicians. And I got to see the opportunities of basically learning jazz and being able to improvise and express yourself through that. So I found that really interesting. And because I had such a heavy classical background, it was kind of like a release for me, playing rock and jazz. And yeah, it was after high school that I decided to go to college and study jazz bass at college level.
And it's right that you hadn't really studied the bass until college?
No, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I hadn't taken formal lessons. I'd just kind of mucked around on it.
Even to go to the electric bass from the piano or the clarinet, I would think might require a change in your attitude about your musical responsibility in an ensemble. And was that an adjustment you felt you had to make when you started playing the electric bass?
Playing the upright bass, yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of technique, it's a whole nother ballgame. I was kind of just messing around with it in high school, but I had no idea about fingerings and positions and that sort of thing. And it is different, you know, technically. There are certain things that you would probably do on upright bass that's definitely different from electric bass. My playing mentality definitely changed a little bit, you know, because at that time, what drew me to the upright bass was people like Ray Brown, Charles Mingus, and the album that really got me into playing the upright bass was Night Train, the Oscar Peterson Trio record. I couldn't believe that you could get such a beautiful, warm sound out of the bass, and also the facility was just tremendous. And yeah, so that was a real inspiring record for me that kind of helped me transition. There were definitely a few aesthetic things that changed in my playing. Also, you know, I hadn't been playing jazz too seriously at that point, even when I did transition. So for me, it was like, oh, okay, let's figure out this new instrument and see where it goes, you know? Like, I didn't think too much about it.
What kind of opportunities did you have to jam or to try improvisation and try jazz out when you were going through this, let's say, still in high school? Were there other musicians you could play with? Or?
Yeah, I had some good friends in the jazz band. It's funny because our high school instruments that we kind of specialized in weren't the instruments that we really wanted to play. And, no, classical bassoon was something that I was very much into, so I loved doing that, but I really loved playing the electric bass as well, and I had some friends who were very similar. Some of them were classical percussionists who had closet rock guitarists and that sort of thing. And so we kind of took time out of that and basically started our own bands. We had a rock band. It was called E-Day Fix. And E-Day is, and we took that because I think it was an element in one of Bartok's pieces, the idea of the recurring theme, the E-Day Fix spelt. So it's in French, I-D-E-E, with an accent, and then F-I-X-E. And we thought we'd be so clever, and we'd spell it E, like E, and then day as in D-A-Y, and F-I-X. Yeah, so that was our band. And
what kind of music were you playing?
We were covering Chili Peppers, a lot of Rage Against the Machine, some Metallica, and we had a bunch of originals, actually. Yeah, I need to get that CD again, because I actually really dug some of those tunes, but it was really funny. The lead singer was, in school he was the euphonium player, but in our band he was this long-haired guy wearing chains who would just scream, you know. And our drummer was the classical trumpet player in school, and yeah.
What kind of places did you work in with this band?
Well, work is an interesting word because...
Perform, where did you perform?
We did a performance once at high school, which I still can't even remember the outcome of it. I was just thrilled to be playing in front of people like in this band, and we recorded a CD for like a band competition, but that never went anywhere. But yeah, it was just interesting, and it was really fun to get together with like-minded musicians and people, you know, because we were all just kind of various misfits of whatever we came from, you know. Yeah.
Now, when you went to college, you had not studied the upright bass yet. So did you audition as a bassoon player, or? I
auditioned on electric bass, actually. Okay. Yeah, and at that time I wasn't sure if I think I kind of wanted to just play like Jaco Pastorius and just do that, you know. But
jump off your amplifier.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, I think I auditioned on electric bass, and I did audition for classical bassoon for a classical program, I think, and I'd also my first choice in the equivalent of the SATs was actually law, and then I think it was like a few months before I did decide, I was like, screw that, and I just changed.
Better early than late, take it from one who
Yeah.
waited a while. I mean, bass strikes me as a very difficult instrument, a very challenging instrument, and particularly that far along, I would think a lot of people were saying, look, you know, if you like to play the electric and you've got that down, do you really want to grapple with this? But apparently you took to it.
Well, it's funny because I think most people were actually very encouraging, especially within the jazz realm, because I felt that people always wanted acoustic upright players, you know, and you'll find that a lot of the, when I go to Australia and I do clinics at high schools, most of the bass players are electric bass players who, like me, were into rock music, and a lot of them thought upright was just a bit too difficult or maybe a bit too restrictive or something, and they wanted to play like Jaco or Slap, you know. And I think people were actually encouraging me to take up upright, and yeah, and that was a great thing. Yeah, it really wasn't much of an issue.
When young bass players of either instrument ask you advice, do you suggest that they become comfortable with both, just from a practical work, again, to introduce a strange word, perspective?
Well, I think it depends. Like, it depends what kind of music you want to play, what kind of direction you want to go in. And if you're adamant, and if you're sure that there's a direction you want to go in that doesn't require playing both, then go for it. If you can work hard and believe you can do it, and I would say go for it. But if you want to play jazz, if you want to swing, and you want to play in jam sessions, and I don't know, if there's certain people you want to play with, then aesthetically upright would be a good idea. Okay. You know?
But I mean, as the leader of a band and a composer, you still seem to find that you can express yourself on either instrument.
I try. I think these days I play definitely more upright than I do electric, especially in most band contexts. The main places I play electric bass are more like in gospel settings, that sort of thing. Okay. So it's just a different aesthetic. Yeah, but I love both, and I like to play both. So.
Now, you mentioned competitions before, and I know that you've won awards in several composers' competitions, in addition to just instrumental competitions. And talk about your development as a composer and how your development as a jazz musician affected your writing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the things that I end up practicing on the instrument, I inevitably end up writing into my music, and vice versa. Like, there was a time when I had to finish, I wanted to write some new music for a group that I was working on, that I'm still working on. It's a string project with a string quartet it's a double quartet, so piano, bass, sax, drums, and then a string quartet. And I always talk to fellow musicians about how tough it is to balance your time, because the times that you work so hard on composing, you spend so much time doing that you go back to your instrument and you're like, oh, this feels a bit funny, you know, and vice versa. You know, you'll spend a lot of time playing and touring, and then you realize that, wow, when's the last time I wrote a new tune, or, you know, that sort of thing. And I got to the point the other day when I was doing a lot of arranging. I was actually in Japan, and I was trying to finish some of these tunes, and I was taking advantage of the time that, because we were traveling so much, we were on so many trains that, you know, you can't really practice on a train or anything. So I was riding a lot on these trains, and it definitely changed the way I played on those gigs, because I did think a bit more in terms of thematic development or pacing. I think they both inform each other, but I like to borrow techniques from the practical aspect into my composing aspect, and vice versa, you know. I mean, improvisation is just basically composing on the spot. It's the same thing, but it's just about the time it takes to process, you know.
I know your last album, Sun Pictures, was basically music that you were inspired to write over the course of touring, if I'm not mistaken. Do you find you need these real-life episodes to inspire compositions, or can you take a more abstract approach to writing?
Real-life episodes as in...
Well, but there's one about a movie theater,
yeah.
and one about being in an airport, stuck in an airport, I think.
Yeah.
So, you know, life experience versus just sitting down and writing Opus 5 or something like that.
Yeah, I don't really, if something does inspire me, it doesn't have to be a thing that happens and it's like, I'm going to write a tune about it. There are times where I just choose to do things that I think will be interesting, or if I just hear something. The last thing that I finished was some string music, and I wanted to arrange a Charlie Parker tune, but I wanted it to be different, and I wanted a challenge. So my challenge was for each instrument to play the melody. So Opera Vive's like
Opera Vive?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the course of the whole tune, each instrument, besides the piano and the sax, play the melody essentially, but in different rhythms and in different keys. So the bass line ended up being and still outlining the melody, but just in different rhythms. And then the violins and the viola and the cello would come in with their keys, but still within those guidelines. So sometimes I just set myself like little games. There's more detail about that on one of my blogs on my website if you want to check it out. But yeah, sometimes I like having those games just to challenge myself. It's kind of like creating a little mental game and seeing what you can come up with and figure out how to make it musical at the end of the day, so it doesn't just sound like numbers that you've just thought, oh, I wonder if this matches with that,
The music you write strikes me quite often as having great rhythmic challenges for the improvisers. And I wonder if rhythm is a starting point for you when you compose some of these pieces, or how it fits in. Because there are a lot of really tricky forms rhythmically in what you write.
It can be. Sometimes I don't really think much about it. Some of my pieces have started with like a rhythm that I want to build upon, and then I try and figure out rhythm and then how the bass line is going to fit in with that, and then the melody comes after. Or some of the new tunes we'll be playing tonight, there's one that I just sang a long melody, a long diatonic melody into my phone and just elaborated from that and tried to rehum everything underneath. And you'll hear it tonight. It's a piece that starts with a unison melody, and gradually throughout the piece, more elements are added, so that the unison melody that sounds very diatonic, actually there are other things that come underneath it that change the key and just make it like a constant build towards the end. Sometimes I have those concepts in mind.
I was really impressed with your two albums on Greenleaf. But sonically, they're very different because one uses a variety of keyboards and one uses guitar, which is the group you have. And I wonder if it's a matter of the musicians you happen to be playing with at the moment, or a sound you hear that leads you to find the musicians to fulfill that sound notion.
Yeah, well, definitely with the last album, I was writing specifically for guitar, and I had written these pieces for the members that were on the album, Ted Poor, Ben Wendell, and James Marlowe, who's a guitarist from Adelaide, Australia. And I kind of had them in mind when I was writing a lot of these. Some of them I had written earlier. Sometimes I do have a sound in mind, and it really helps when you know who you're writing for. But then, at the end of the day, people get busy and you can't always use the same musicians. So then you just have to think about, okay, who do you want to interpret this music? And it's a beautiful thing that it's not going to be the same way that it was when you recorded it or when you wrote it for a specific person. And if there are things that can only be played by that one person that you wrote it for, then write something new, you know.
Let me take a step back. We left you in college. You're still in Australia, I assume. When did you come to the U.S. and what was the motivation? And was it for study, to play with a certain person?
Yeah, the first time I came, I was 19, and I had won this this thing. It was there used to be a thing called the International Association of Jazz Education, and they had within them there was a kind of a subgroup called Sisters in Jazz, and I'm very lucky because they assembled a quintet of female collegiate musicians to come together and play in New York at an IAJU conference, and so that was my first ticket to New York, was to actually come and play, and that was such an eye-opening experience because we had Rini Rosnes as our mentor, and she's amazing, and I'm so grateful to have met her then. Like, she was just so straight up, and you know, I had only had I had a female bassoon teacher and a female piano player, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was different having a female mentor as opposed to a male mentor, which was basically everyone that we had in Perth. It's something like, I don't know, Rini was just so upfront but also very empathetic, you know, and it was a great experience. She taught us a lot, and I felt she gave me a lot of confidence at that time, and she also brought in some great musicians such as Todd Coolman, Walt Weiskopf, and Ray Drummond. And to have that experience coming from Perth, Western Australia, and come to New York and have all this information given to you, it's just like a dream come true. And also the musicians I played with in that quintet, they were such great musicians. One of them is Ariel Alexander, who lives on the West Coast now, and she has her own, I think at that time she was only like 21, and she had her own non-for-profit that was, I think, aimed at like educating young girls, I think. Yeah, they were just such great musicians, and I kept in contact with them, and through that time, the pianist, who's also a vocalist, Brenda Earle, she was studying at the Manhattan School of Music, and she said, why don't you just come to one of my classes? And I was like, okay, cool. And I went and sat in and just checked it out, and I kind of thought in the back of my mind, like, I have to come, you know? And yeah, so I took advantage of that time to take some lessons in New York, and then once you come, you can't really, you have to come back, you know? So I came back and I auditioned for Manhattan School, and I was very lucky, and I got in. Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of young musicians, when they come to New York, they have to take gigs they wouldn't always prefer to take to just sort of pay the bills and until they establish themselves. Do you have any of these gigs?
Yeah.
Going to give us the example of the kind of stuff that someone in that position has to deal with?
I'd kind of like countless. I remember being stuck on I think it was the 3 train way out in East Brooklyn after I got stranded after a gig. Someone had called me to sub for a random R&B gig in a place that wasn't even really listed on the internet. It was so underground, and gig started like 3 hours late, and the singer I was supposed to be playing with was, I don't know what she was on at the time, but it was just such a mess. And I just remember being on the train like at like 3, 4 in the morning, coming home from like East Brooklyn. Oh yeah, I was like, what do you call it, frisked when I walked into this club. I just thought it was just really funny because I was like, you really think I'm going to be holding some sort of a weapon? Yeah. You know, it was such a random night. Yeah, a lot, you know. Especially, there are some musicians that they want all female rhythm sections for whatever reasons, you know. But yeah, there were some funny instances.
Okay.
I shouldn't really. Yeah, I don't want to.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Was there a gig though where I'm sure one of the challenges is just breaking in to the group of musicians you would like to play with, and getting called by them to participate with them, and maybe having them answer your calls when you have gigs. Is there a particular gig you think that was like a turning point for you in establishing yourself in New York?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few moments definitely that I was like, wow, you know, I got that call, you know.
Yeah.
I think being at Manhattan School and being in New York, I was lucky enough to be playing with some good friends who were great musicians who were inspiring. And when they would start getting good gigs and meeting great musicians as well, like it was kind of like a chain effect. Like you just start meeting more people and you play with more people. Definitely getting called to play with Kenny Barron was one of those moments. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? You know. I went to the Banff workshop in 2007, and after that, Dave Douglas had asked me to do a recording with Ravi Coltrane and Vijay Iyer and Marcus Gilmore, and that was like, oh, okay. All right. Yeah, okay. So there were definitely a few points, and yeah.
Well, I know you've been working with Dave Douglas's quintet and also with the Sound Prince band that Dave and Joe Lovano have. Yeah, what else are you up to these days besides your own music?
I just got back from Greece last night with Kenny Barron, so it's been pretty awesome playing with him. We had a couple of gigs out there. I guess there's some stuff coming up with Dave. Dave's recording a new album in August, and a friend of mine that I went to Manhattan School with, Fabian Almazan, has just come up with a new CD, which is half on Blue Note, half on Artist Share, and yeah, so he's going to be doing some stuff, and I'm hopefully just going to be doing a lot more writing. I'm just working on some of my own things, my own musical growth. I just started taking some Korean drumming lessons randomly, but they've been incredible. Yeah.
I noticed on your website you talked about playing in China and meeting some more traditional musicians. And is this a new element that's coming into your music? Or?
Yeah, it's. I guess so. I guess I have lots of different interests, and I draw from different places. And if I think something's interesting, I'm going to check it out, you know. And when I was in Beijing, I asked a friend of mine who had spent some time there, a great vocalist, Jen Shu, and I asked her if she knew of any local musicians who I could go check out, and they were very open. And I met this one Shuo Chang musician. Shuo Chang means speak singing, and he does a lot of singing, and his father plays san xian, a Chinese instrument, and he said, yeah, just come over to my place and we'll play for you. And I kind of had a really beautiful house concert with him and his dad. It was beautiful. I mean, I'm ethnically Chinese, but I'm Malaysian Chinese, which is slightly different from mainland Chinese, you know. Slightly different mentalities, but it's funny because growing up, I feel like now I feel more Australian and more Chinese than I have felt before in some weird way, you know. And when I was growing up, we took Chinese lessons, but they were always a drag, you know. We didn't have like a large Chinese community or anything like that. And now I'm kind of looking back and trying to get more into my Mandarin and that sort of thing. With the music, I find it incredibly interesting, like the dedication that these musicians have, and how complex a lot of these songs are, and how much time and effort they put into these the songs that they learn. And I've been listening to a little bit of the Shuo Chang stuff and trying to incorporate a bit of those elements into my playing. Well, particularly my compositions. You know, one thing I find with that genre of music is that it's heavily centered around storytelling and also just the melodic component. There's so much memory involved, it's not like an A form that goes around and around and around. It's like this long passage of notes that just go by, and I kind of found it kind of similar to like Irish fiddle music, you know, those melodies that are kind of only like a specific palette of notes, but they're just such beautiful combinations that just kind of go, you know. I kind of really dug that aspect.
You mentioned the project with strings, and that was an 8-piece group. How many different bands are in play right now for you of your own?
I guess probably 3, like this quartet, and then the quartet which I recorded my second album with, Initial Here, and the string project, which I'm hoping to play more often. It's just logistically hard to always get 8 people together and figure that out. Mm-hmm.
Is it challenging to find string players who can integrate with a jazz ensemble, or is that becoming less of a problem as musicians take a wider view of what music is about?
Yeah, I feel like it is becoming less of a problem, and I think, but it helps. I've been working with the Serious String Quartet for the last couple of years, and it helps kind of knowing people's strengths and weaknesses, and that's been very helpful, especially for the last gig, just knowing who you're writing for. It helps. They specialize also in improvisation, and yeah, it is difficult trying to bridge the classical versus jazz thing, but I think, yeah, if you're working with open, like-minded individuals, it gets very easy. Yeah.
And I noticed, I think it's on Initial here, you do play a little bassoon.
Mm-hmm.
Is on that? Is that something you sort of keep up, or when a composition presents itself, do you go in woodshed?
It's funny you say that, because Ben actually brought his bassoon up here actually just to practice, and I'm really curious to check it out. But, you know, I haven't played it in a long time, and the main, I found it very useful when I was doing film scoring, because just to have that other element of an acoustic instrument and not always like MIDI sounds. And yeah, I kind of used it for that, you know, in the last few years, but yeah, it's been a while.
Okay, so we're not going to hear you play.
No.
Okay. There's going to be a sound check at 6:15. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for anyone to offer a question. As I always say, oh, good, we have the first one.
When you studied the acoustic bass, did you study classical style and bowing, or did you go right into jazz and you know, just pitsing the bass?
I studied classical, but initially it was mainly what my jazz teacher was teaching me, which wasn't exactly his forte at the time, you know. And I did take a few classical lessons, but really, I've only taken a handful, you know. A lot of it has just been my own practice and just asking friends, what do you do when this happens? And, you know, how do I finger this, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's something I wish I would have had more training in, and I expect to have more training in the future.
No one else?
I'll do one. Earlier this year, I was in New York and had a chance to see Billy Childs with his double quartet, just exactly like you're talking about. Did you have a chance to see that?
I saw that like a couple of years ago, actually. Scott Colley, Steve Wilson. Yeah, it was fantastic. He's such a great composer. Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah, I have checked out a few of the same kind of settings, you know. And one of my favorite versions of something similar is Andrew Hill with strings. Like, I just love how different that is. And I you know, a string player who was in the Cirrus Quartet said to me the other day, like, it's so nice to be able to play these string parts that we can actually open up on, and it's not just like we're just string pads for solo sections, you know, trying to add that element of just, you know, just color, you know, all the time. Like, there's interaction and there's importance, you know, significance in what they do, and that's something that I try to do with my string writing, just something a little bit different that isn't just like, all right, can you play the backgrounds in this and just the basically what a piano player might play, just,
Have you ever tried incorporating a harp into your music?
A harp?
Yeah.
It would be great. I'm friends with Brandy Younger, who lives in New York City. My sister used to play the pedal harp, actually. Yeah, I haven't really thought that much about it, no.
Sure.
Here, another one. But when you studied the bass in music school, did you really concentrate on acoustic, or did you work with both electric and acoustic?
I concentrated on acoustic, I have to say, like, yeah, definitely, yeah, throughout my undergrad. Well, actually, yeah, both, and yeah, it was more like the electric came out at times, you know, when I was playing in more Latin like in salsa situations or gospel situations, yeah. Yeah.
Steve?
I read that you were doing something involving a remote video class, like master classes with high school students. And I was curious how that worked.
Manhattan School has a distance learning program, and it's basically, they have a few different programs, and basically me and two other people, a pianist and a drummer, we basically, there's a couple of programs. There's one that's the history of jazz, which we talk about, like the history of the instrument and that sort of thing, and then there's Journey Through Jazz. Journey Through Jazz is basically just giving an overview of jazz itself to high school kids, not high school kids, mainly elementary kids. And so in that we kind of talk about the difference between just the basic styles of swing, bebop, you know, and fusion, and we just give like rough overviews and that sort of thing, and just kind of open their ears up a little bit. Manhattan School has an incredible distance learning department, and I guess they use a thing called Internet 2, which is like, I guess, the faster internet, which means that there's very little latency, and we can interact with the students and ask them questions, and we play games with them. Like we have this thing where we say that when we improvise, there are some set rules that we play. It's like playing basketball. You know, you can't just you run up with the ball and like hit someone on the head and then dunk it in the, you know, that sort of thing. So we have the same version where we play, and then like one person breaks the rules, and then all the kids have to figure out who it was, and you know. So yeah, it's really fun. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you said you didn't really have that much formal training in the beginning. How did you develop such good posture and hand position and like without doing Somali method or you know, something along those lines?
I did do Samandal method. I didn't have a lot of instruction. It was just kind of like I kind of just tried to figure it out, and I did have a few great lessons with you know, a lot of jazz players can play classical, but it's definitely not their specialty, you know. So I definitely got information, but it wasn't like I studied classical bass formally, you know. But I have to say the best lessons for technique are watching videos of people with great technique. Like, I remember watching, I mean, there's so many great videos online, but, you know, watching Patitucci and seeing how he plays, and watching Scott Colley was one person I love to watch, because he's just so smooth on the instrument, and it's like his left hand is just an entity in itself. Yeah, so I felt like definitely watching videos helped. Yeah.
Any more? Okay, well, we're going to make way for a sound check in 5 minutes. And Linda and her quartet will be here tonight. Is it called the Sun Pictures Quartet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a great album, as is Initial here. Do you play music from both with this band?
There'll be probably 2 tunes from Initial
Okay.
here, but yeah, a couple of new ones and from Sun Pictures.
But anyway, I'm sure we'll see everybody back here at 8 o'clock. And I hope I see you back here again tomorrow at 5:30. We're going to be speaking with Julian Lage. So thanks for coming out and keep enjoying the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.